Welcome to the Bemidji Area Chamber of Commerce's Meet the Candidates series, which consists of video interviews with the mayoral candidates running for the candidacy of mayor in the upcoming local primary election. My name is Kayla Winkler, a volunteer board member on the Bemidji Area Chamber and your host of this interview. I am here today to represent the Bemidji Area Chamber of Commerce as a volunteer member of the board and not affiliated or to endorse any person, entity, organization other than the Bemidji Area Chamber of Commerce. Today's interview will cover topics that affect Bemidji's business community and economic growth. The goal of the interview is to help our members make an informed choice among the mayoral candidates in the August 11th local primary election. The candidate in today's interview will be provided with a 2-minute max to introduce themselves, and then we'll have 3 minutes to answer the specific questions that have been chosen by the Bemidji Area Chamber Board of Directors. I would like to introduce you to Mark Thorson and let him introduce himself to us.
Hi, I think the best introduction is just an explanation of why I'm running for mayor. The city currently is having some significant financial woes. There's several financial concerns going forward that myself and others see. My background to address that is quite diverse in both, it's anchored in both the arts and commerce. But particularly as it pertains to Bemidji, I think what's important is my last 23 years owning and operating a heavy highway construction company and years of business experience before that. But the company I operate, Mark Sand Gravel Company, it not only has a budget that's the size of Bemidji's, and exceeds that, but I've also have experience in dealing with many of the same regulatory agencies, similar insurance and bonding issues, labor, legal issues. It just gives me a plethora of experience in dealing with problems like this. There are 4 things I think that I bring to the table that I've gained from years of experience in the highway construction business and dealing with an entity the size of Bemidji's. One is my ability of financial troubleshooting, dealing with complex financial problems and problem solving through those. A second is I have an ability to see financial difficulty coming, kind of like some can witch for water or can find gold. I just have an ability of seeing financial problems coming. I'll give you just a couple examples of that. The 2008 financial crash of the United States, I not only predicted that, I held meetings, we downsized our companies over about an 18-month period prior to that, sold off 2 ready-mix plants, 2 asphalt plants. One of them is right here in Bemidji, which is today Lakes Concrete. That was originally Mark Rock Concrete. The Sanford Center 10 years ago, I predicted exactly where that was going to be 10 years hence, which is right now today. That's exactly where it is financially. A third issue I bring is having dealt with many people, employees, employing folks of many different walks of life over many years. I've learned and adapted ability to listen, learn, direct, talk to people according to their skill set or their background, which is a form of communication, which is vitally important when you govern by council, because the mayor is not a presidential figure. He doesn't have a bully pulpit. It's important to be able to put things in people's language and communicate effectively so we understand each other, especially in an environment like we have now where people are so polarized and shouting past one another. And the fourth thing is just an ability of critical thinking, critical thought, thinking something all the way through. I'm usually the person on a board or in a meeting or in any kind of a problematic situation that has that one last question before a motion goes through, that one last thought, that one last concern. And I think that's vital and necessary right now to the city of Bemidji.
So thank you. I'd like to go ahead and begin the interview questions and remind you that you will have 3 minutes to answer each question. I can give you about a 2-minute warning. We talked about I can go a little bit longer, and I'll kind of let you know when we're running out of time. And my timer will start at the end of the question. So are you ready?
Just like sports. We got a clock. Sure, I'm ready.
All right. So tell me, what do you consider the single most critical issue the city is facing, and how do you propose to solve that?
Well, as I pointed out in my introduction, the reason I'm running is financial concerns. And I think without question, without any reservation, that is the single largest problem facing Bemidji. Everything else depends upon it. a lot of the other things we can discuss and talk about, whether it be the event center, Sanford Center, the new water treatment plant, all these issues come down to money. You know, the Sanford Center wouldn't even be a discussion if we were flush with cash. We could live with the shortfalls there annually. So financial is the big thing. And how I see to address that, it's a mindset, it's a discipline. There are three things essentially, but I'll put two of them into one. That's spending and debt. We have an enormous debt load right now, enormous, and it's going to grow larger. We have financial equations, spending to revenue ratios that are dangerously tight. A forecast financially is uncertain. We have a budget right now that's out of whack. It was set last winter, and with the corona season, the coronavirus, you know, our sales tax revenues are considerably dropped. They're down. Shortfalls at the event center, it's been closed for 4 or 5 months. They're going to be significantly lower. And we have no rainy day fund. We have very little cash reserves. We're not prepared for this stuff. When you're in business, you always expect the unexpected. Always be prepared for the unforeseen, always. And Bemidji is not. So that's what I mean by it's a mindset. It's a conditioning. It's a way you posture yourself. And so putting the brakes on spending, they're talking about spending $14 million for an example right now on a water treatment plant, which I am not convinced is the solution to that problem. There are other solutions to that problem. They were talking last week of hiring a property cop, you know, to go on the joint power board and forth with money they don't have. It's a mindset. It's a disciplinary action. That's the first part of the equation. The second part is revenue enhancement. And one of the biggest issues there for raising revenue is the tax base. And it's not by raising taxes, which is what the current model is, or by annexing our way to revenue. It's growing in value. And one of the problems, one of the issues that's got to be dealt with is the Greater Bemidji Area Joint Planning Board. That's, I call it the JPB for short, but that energy is misdirected. The focus is off. It's become a very heavy regulatory system. And right now, some building projects take up to 20-25% are absorbed just in the regulatory permitting costs, where they should be put into streamlines, or they put into infrastructure to grow our revenue.
What do you feel is the city's role in attracting new businesses and industry?
You know, there's the rudimentary things a lot of cities do. They recruit, they advertise, they try to draw in interest to an area. And I've looked at this. Our company is based out of Fergus Falls, Minnesota. I live in Bemidji, but back in 2002, 2003, we were looking at relocating. We built a new office complex. And we looked at Moorhead, Wapton, North Dakota, Fargo, Detroit Lakes. We looked at Bemidji. And so I know what some communities offer. And at that time, Moorhead was a terrific model. It's one to look at. Bemidji should actually seek out. And this is back 15 years ago. I don't know what it's like now, but it was, and I think they're a big reason that Moorhead grew so much in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. But to track business, the first thing you have to do, I mean, you're going to have that. But the other thing is you have to have an environment that's welcoming to business and that's stimulating. And you start with what we've got. You got to take care of what we have before you draw anybody else in. You got to make sure it's attractive for those that are here to bring anybody else to the table. And right now, I go back to that JPB, the Joint Power Board. It's that department. It's not the people. I want to be clear about this. The people on there, I think, are very good. I know several of them. The ones I don't know, I know enough about them to say they're quality people. I wouldn't change any of them out. It's not that. It's just that the focus is off. The energy is misdirected. They become very heavily regulated, orientated, and light on the service side. If you look at them like a police department, they're there to protect and serve. They've become just too heavy on that protection side of the regulation side of the scale and light on service. They got to service the customer, the business owner, the builder, and get a cost-effective permitting process that's expedient and efficient for a person to go through. I can give several examples, but if you look at like Chesterberg Motors, what they went through to build what they built. Right. When they got done, if they would have known, I think David Berg would have known what he had to go through. He's done, he never would have started. The one next door, Bemidji Chrysler, had much bigger plans. When they did their innovation, they sized it down because of the costs. When you got 20-25% of your building costs, your growth costs going into permitting and regulatory compliance, you cannot tax regulation. You can't tax a permit. You got to put that into infrastructure, and that's going to be, like I previously stated, cleaning out some of those regulations, putting flexibility to some others, and just making that a more user-friendly process to attract other people. There's been businesses that I know that have bypassed Bemidji because of this problem. Yes, you're going to get an occasional Delta Dental, but you lose so many when you've got an environment that is not streamlined and built for a business-friendly atmosphere.
A significant challenge for our chamber members and our city is the panhandling, public drunkenness, and other safety concerns within the community. How do you plan to resolve these issues?
That I'm glad to see that question. I've seen it on another forum or two as well. And I originally brought this up when I launched my campaign. It was in my initial campaign statements, along with Bemidji's financial health concerns. I think others have tended to avoid it because it can get politically sensitive. It's a sensitive issue. So I'm glad that forums like this kind of force people, cajole them into addressing it. That problem is a good example to start with of something not being thought all the way through. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about critical thinking. In the city's attempt, by allowing those permits to build that facility that's on the far west end of 3rd Street, in the attempt to help one issue, which was noble, and I agree with it and I back it, they created a series of new problems because they didn't think it all the way through. So if you ask the question, what was the plan? The answer is there was no plan. It wasn't thought through. To deal with it, to answer your question specifically, it's a multi-headed problem. It's a problem for the downtown and surrounding businesses. It's a tourism problem. It's a health and safety issue. It's a policing issue. It's a problem. And to address it, there's several things I would recommend, but I'll put them in 3 rough areas. Number 1, the facility that's on far end of 3rd Street. There's property on 3 sides of that building that I think could be attached, purchased, annexed to it to create a larger area, park-type setting with walking paths, benches, a series of things that's fenced in, gated, protected from traffic, so people are protected from the railroad tracks. So people have a place to go, to walk, to stretch their legs, to sit, to ponder, to do what they do. That's the first thing. Violations that people that use that facility, if they have violations in the downtown, vagrancy, of drunkenness, of drugs, then they've got to become restricted. They can only leave with a pass or a permit, and then that's got to be tracked. And I could speak on this for quite some time. There's a lot of detail that goes into that. It's got to be worked out with the coming and going rules of that facility. But there's a lot that can be done with that. The second thing is the downtown's got to get in unison as far as reporting problems. They've got, it's very quick, just a phone call and a documentation. It doesn't take any time to address when they see a problem going outside their business or on the street. It's the broken windows syndrome. The Harvard study of several years ago, if you leave a broken window in your neighborhood, you're going to get more. Or if you look at rail cars with graffiti, it wasn't addressed, so now we have rail cars all over the United States that have graffiti on. You got to address it right away aggressively. And the third thing is cooperation with the police department, which they're very helpful in this. I know that from experience. But their funding is kind of set up more to incentivize them for traffic issues, DUIs, that sort of thing, which is fine. But they need to be incentivized somewhat in this area too, just to give them a little more motivation to do the very best that they possibly can. You put those 3 prongs of action into motion, and you're going to get this resolved. They're very close to it.
Last question. The Sanford Center is an important asset for Bemidji. What goals do you have for the Sanford Center, and how will you hold Venue Works accountable to these goals?
Again, I appreciate the question. It's a financial question again. Mm-hmm. I go back to people don't want to talk about water under the bridge, so to speak. They don't want to talk about the past. But just in a sentence or two, I think it's important because it's that lack of critical thinking, not thinking that all the way through back 10, 11 years ago, that got us this problem we have today. I was very clear about it 10 years ago, exactly where they're going to be today. It's where they are. And if you could just get ourselves into a mindset of critical thinking, I could live with all the losses at the event center. It would be just fine, be well worth it. But the problem is we keep plowing into the next one. We want to band-aid the problems from the past and plow into another project without thinking it all the way through. Now, to answer your question, the first thing is there's several things. I could list several, but I'll just list a few. The first is take care of what we have. Take care of what we've got. I've not been in that building since last winter. It's basically been closed for 4 or 5 months because of the virus. But I look at the outside and there's deterioration. There's maintenance and upkeep that's not being kept up with. There's dead trees, there's weeds growing up. Those don't necessarily cost anything. But when you have weeds in the parking lot coming up through cracks down on the west end, some a foot, 2 feet high, they're starting to grow roots that are pushing on the pavement. I built that parking lot. It's a $2-3 million parking lot. It's a good piece of pavement. At 10 years old, it's still a very good piece of pavement, but those cracks have to be cleaned out, filled. It's just like personal health. You take care of yourself every day, you'll be in much better shape than if you just let everything go and decide to catch up in 10 years. If they don't look after that, that parking lot, Mother Nature will start reclaiming or taking it back. And in another 4, 5, 8 years, there's going to be a $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 bill to replace it. And that's not necessary. Take care of what we've got. And that's just one example of many, but do not take looking at what we have maintenance-wise. The second thing is we've got to be more judicious about what is let in there, what's allowed in there. We have a 10-year history of knowing what works as far as financially and what doesn't. I think the mindset has been, the instinct is it's ours. We have this huge investment. Let's just use it as much as we possibly can. But a lot of these venues, a lot of these events lose money. There's several that make money. The beer hockey games are good. They're right. Several concerts are good. Like I say, we have a 10-year history of knowing what works and what doesn't work. But some of these events, I call them financial dogs. It's not a good term, but we've got to clean through those and assess them and just clean some of those out. There are some that we may want to keep just because we could measure, put a yardstick to it and say they bring other amenities or tax revenue to the city, even though they lose in that building, and they may be worth it. But we've got to go through and be judicious and clean that out. The third thing is a hospitality tax. I'm not a proponent of it, but at this point it's a foregone conclusion. I think it's inevitable. That's a third, but I would strongly suggest getting some of the hospitality people, Rich Seegert, Kevin Williams, and others involved in the initiation of that process and that program.
Thank you so much. Well, this does conclude today's interview. I'd like to thank our Bemidji Area Chamber members for watching. I'm going to please check on our website, www.bemidji.org, for all of the interviews in this series, as well as other relevant local election information. Remember to vote in the upcoming primary election on Tuesday, August 11th. Thank you for joining, and thank you so much to Mark for taking the time to visit with me this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.